Hey everyone, this is Ashley with CT and Rena Digitals. I'm going to show you a tutorial today on how to use my backdrop strip overlays in Photoshop. I'm going to show you a few different images, how to use it on an image more close up, a white background, and a medium color background with a photo further away. I'll do this one first. There's a couple ways to get the layer above your image. You can either open it up in Photoshop, copy and paste it in a layer above your image, or you can just go up to File and Place Embedded, and then navigate to the folder where your backdrop strips are, and choose which one you're going to use. I'm going to use this one for this photo. Now, there's no right or wrong way to use them when it comes to like blending mode. It's going to depend on your backdrop color. It's going to depend on your photo itself. So I'm just going to show you how I individually tweak them just to make them look the most realistic. So I placed it, I want it to be like a thinner, about here on my photo looks good. And I'm going to use this probably on soft light blending mode, but first I'm going to hide this layer because I want it to be completely behind her. So I'm going to select my background layer. I'm going to go over to my quick selection tool. I'm going to click select subject up at the top. Make sure it does a pretty good job of selecting her. There's a little bit of her hair up here that it didn't get. Okay, and then I'm going to duplicate that layer, create a layer mask, and that's automatically going to clip it, and then I'm going to press Control or Command I on my keyboard to invert that layer. And then if you make this layer visible again, press your Alt key in between these two layers to make it go completely behind her. Obviously, this is not the look I'm going for. I could either lower my opacity if I like the way that that looks, or I could play with the blending modes. I want this blending mode on soft light. Okay, so now since this photo is a little bit closer up, the overlay is a little bit too sharp for me. So I'm going to go ahead and go up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and I'm going to add a little bit of blur to the overlay just so it blends in with my backdrop a little bit more and it looks more realistic. Okay. Now the most important part with using these, if you want it to look like it is hanging in front of the backdrop that you already have in the photo, you need to add a shadow. So be sure that your strip layer is selected. Go down to add drop shadow down here at the bottom. Be sure that, so you want the shadow to be the same shade or color as the backdrop that you are going to be putting it on, but a little darker. So this shade is okay. I'm gonna make it darker. I'm gonna press OK. Now you want this little angle right here, you want this pointing toward your light source. So the light is coming from this way. So that's exactly where I want to do it for this. That way it's saying that the light's coming from this way, so it's going to add the shadow down and around here. So for distance, and again, you can play around with this. If I put this up 100% opacity, it's going to make that pretty dark. I don't want that to be that dark. So I'm going to lower that a little bit. Distance is how far the shadow is going to fall onto your backdrop. You can play around with that too. I like to have my distance pretty high, but not too high. If you have it very high, it looks like your light source is a lot closer to your subject than what it actually is. And then the size, I typically like to have that all the way up. It just spreads it out. It doesn't make it look so sharp, and it's nice and feathered. And then Go ahead and press OK and leave everything else the same. Now you see if I turn that off, it looks a lot better. And it's actually, if you go ahead and click back into it, double click it, go back down to drop shadow, I'm going to lower that opacity even a little bit more. Okay, and now for me, I like that. That looks good. So before and after. Next photo. Zoom in a little bit here. Once again, so the last time I went up to File and Place Embedded. A different way you can do it is just go to File and Open, navigate to your folder, and double click on the overlay that you want to use. Go up to Select All, Edit, Copy, go back to your image and paste. Resize. Again, no right or wrong way, however you think looks best. Okay, so before I even do anything else, this overlay is too dark for this image. So I'm going to go up to my adjustment layer, go to my curves, and I'm going to brighten this. See how it just brightened that whole image? You want to make sure you click this right here to make it so it is only affecting your overlay. And I'm actually also going to go back to my layer. My light is coming from this side. Right now, my overlay, it's coming over here. So I actually want to just switch that. The lighting and tweaking your lighting in these overlays is going to be the difference between it looking realistic or fake. Okay, and now I actually want to make the green match her dress a little bit more. So I'm going to go up to my hue saturation adjustment, click that. Make sure this should already be clicked if you're doing it in between those layers, but if not, make sure it is. I'm going to lower the saturation on this, get a little bit brighter, and a lot of people ask me how to change the color. This is how, this hue slider up here. That's it. Okay. Alright, so I'm going to select all these layers by holding down Control. I'm going to merge them together. Okay, and now I'm going to hide that. I'm going to select just her again, so go to the Quick Selection tool, select Subject. Make sure it does a pretty good job. Doesn't really matter down here because that's not where the overlay is going to be. So duplicate, create a layer mask, Control or Command I to invert, make that visible, and Alt and click between for it to go behind her. Okay, so a few more things that I want to do to make this look more realistic. I want to get rid of these deeper shadows. I'm going to make sure that my overlay is selected. I'm going to go over to my brush, or I'm sorry, my dodge tool, and play around with the opacity, but mine's at about 33% for the exposure. And I have it on mid-tones because I want to make this even more brighter in areas. Shadows, I want to get rid of some of the harsher shadows because this would not look this dark if it were actually hanging in this room. Okay, now she is pretty far away from the wall. She's a few feet in front of the wall, so I definitely want to add blur to the overlay to make it look realistic. So I'm going to go up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And I think that's a little bit too blurred at that point. About 4. That looks 3.7. That looks good. And press OK. I'm going to add the drop shadow. Okay, so this picked up what I did last time. So the light is coming from over here. So I want to switch this. I'm going to change the color a little bit more to a gray because it's a white wall. And I'm going to bring the size down just a tiny bit, and the opacity I do not want to be very much. Okay, if you toggle that, you can see that it just added a subtle shadow because I want it to be as if it's floating in front of my wall, in between her and the wall. Okay, so now another thing you can do to make this look more realistic. She has a, not a see-through, but a transparent gown. The train, you can see through the train. So I'm going to go ahead and go down to my layer mask on her. I'm going to zoom in. And I'm going to go over to my brush tool. And I'm going to, select my white brush. I'm going to do this at about 20% opacity. And I'm just going to erase some of her train so I can see just a little, see the back, the overlay through her dress. And now if you accidentally erase a little bit too much, all you have to do is go back to your black brush, 100% opacity, and brush it right back off of her. Now if there's any sharp edges around your photo, which the quick selection tool usually does a pretty good job, but obviously if you need to clean up the edges, you can just use this tool for that as well. Okay, so before and after, it's for that one. And again, if you want to make it even brighter, you can keep playing with it, whatever you think makes it look more realistic. The only thing is when you add adjustment layers to your overlay, make sure that you unclip it from her first. Make all your adjustments, merge those layers, and then clip it back. Because if I try to make it brighter again, even if I make this just for this and make it brighter, it's going to make the whole image brighter because I already have my overlay clipped to her. So anything I clip to the overlay is also going to clip to her unless I undo that. Okay. Okay. So before and after again for that one. Okay, and now if she was, if you wanted to make it look like the overlay was a lot closer to her, you would have to add some shadow behind her onto the overlay if you wanted it to make it look like that she was that much closer to it. I like to do it as if they're standing much further in front of it. Your preference though. Okay, for the last one, I'm going to close that out. I'm going to do the file place embedded. And I'm going to use this one. The reds will match her dress. I think that'll look pretty. And it's up to you how thin or thick you want to make it coming down, how far you want it to come down. Oh, and as this one, I didn't change the blending mode. I kept it to normal. If you're working with a white backdrop, you're most likely not going to want to change the blending mode. You can always just change the opacity on the white if it seems like it's still too much. Okay, so first of all, it's bright, so I want to make it just a little bit darker. Make sure you click this just to make it on them. Okay, and then make sure you merge those layers. Now I'm going to play around with the blending modes just so I can see before I take it off of her. I typically like to use soft light, which is probably going to be the case for this one too. So I'm going to go ahead and hide that layer. Select subject, duplicate, create layer mask, Control or Command I to invert, and now we can put it behind her. And I'm going to change that blending mode to soft light. Go in. There's a spot right here that it didn't get. All we have to do is go back down to her mask. Select, white brush, 100% opacity, and just brush it in. Little spots like this, sometimes you have to do it manually because Photoshop won't pick it up. Okay. Make sure everywhere else looks good. Everywhere else looks pretty good. Okay, so now she's quite a bit in front of this backdrop, so I want to blur again my overlay. Filter, blur, Gaussian blur. See, like if you make it too blurry, it's not going to look good at all. It won't look realistic. If you don't make it blurry enough, it's going to look like it's right behind her, and then like I said before, you'd have to add shadows behind her as well. So I want it to blend in with this other background, and that looks good. Need to add, actually want to bring this down more, I think. Okay, add shadow, again down here, drop shadow. Light is coming from over here, so we want it over there. The backdrop is gray, so I want a darker gray than the backdrop. My opacity, I'm going to bring that up. My size, I want all the way. Distance, I'm going to bring in just a smidge. Lower my opacity. Like I said, this might take a little getting used to. If you're not used to Photoshop especially, I definitely recommend at least knowing how to maneuver Photoshop and work with light. Okay. Before, after. And then you can just flatten. Oh, I did want to unflatten. Unclip it from her. Oh, I think I did already show you guys. If you wanted to change the color of that. Oh, we forgot to check that. If you wanted it like a purple or like if, okay, and then we would have to make these, merge these two layers together. You'll have to change your screen or your blending mode back. Like I don't really, that's too vibrant for me, but that's just how you would change the color if you wanted to. Go back. Okay. Oop. Okay, before and after. That's it. If you purchase these off of Etsy and you need a little bit more help or you want to share your work, I do have a link to my Facebook maternity group on the description on the listing if you want to join.